the Zoom meeting, and I think it's live streamed on YouTube,
Yeah.
but they're not, I don't think there would be a way to Zoom through YouTube, if that's the question.
Yeah.
Anyway, we can get some more information on that later on. Listen, thank you, Jennifer. Let me call the meeting to order. And I see where Councilman Griffin has just joined us. If you can hear me, Councilman Griffin, can you bring an invocation, please?
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Dear Heavenly Father, we thank you for this day, for all the many blessings that you bestowed upon us. We ask first and foremost that you keep us ever mindful of those in need. And in this time, Lord, we continue to push for resolutions and finding a vaccine and making our country whole again and healthy again. And at the same time, Lord, we continue to deal with social inequity and how we can improve relations across our nation through all of our people. We remember, Lord, that we're all people through you. And in our times, and especially these times, we have to remember all of the many messages that you've taught us. And we've got to try to be more like you and remember that we were all created in your image. We ask all of these things in your name. We ask that you continue to bless our city, our state, our country, the entire world. We ask all these things in your name. Amen.
Thank you, Councilman Griffin. On the agenda, we've got 4 sets of minutes to approve: the June 22nd, July 13th.
So moved.
Properly moved and
Second.
probably moved and seconded out there. All in favor or any discussion on these minutes?
Aye.
Thank you. No.
You're muted, Councilmember Waring.
Mr. Chairman.
Man, I was rolling, man. I'm telling you. Y'all should have heard me.
He just adjourned the meeting.
We got it.
I was rolling, man. So, but anyway, thank you, Councilman Griffin, for that. I know we're down to item E, acceptance and dedication of rights of way. Mr. O'Brien, is he on the line? I mean, if he is on the line, he's muted. Anybody from engineering on the line? Mr. Fountain?
Mr. Chairman, I can try to address a couple of the items. Certainly, I don't know that I have the full background for all of the items.
Okay, we'll forge through it together. How about that?
That sounds good.
All right.
So I know let's see, the first item, the dedication and acceptance of Johnston Point, Phase 2. So that's I think that's a road, standard new development road acceptance.
Right. So we've had that information on our agenda. Do we have a motion to accept that?
So moved.
Properly moved, and is there a second out there?
Second.
Properly moved and second. Any more discussion on that dedication of that rights of way? Hearing none, all in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Thank you.
So the second item is a sidewalk project on Camp Road. The majority of the sidewalk is on Camp Road, and then part of it goes onto Riverland Drive. And this is the kind of typical thing that the DOT requests the city to take over maintenance of that infrastructure that's being installed normally by the county through the process that requires city maintenance in return for SCDOT encroachment permitting.
Right, that's one of these items that Councilman Shahid loves to move approval on.
I am not moving for approval on that, Mr.
Move for approval.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Is there a second? So somebody gonna second it? Ross, Councilman.
I'll second.
Thank you, sir. Any more discussion on that? Hearing none, all in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Thank you. Item 3, similar one, Mr.
Yes,
Fountain?
this one I am familiar with. This is basically the Market Street Drainage Improvement Project. So the work along Market Street that falls in one of the intersections, the intersecting DOT streets. Basically, DOT again will request us, because they're non-standard DOT items, for this to take over maintenance. We do already have the right of way in the city for the entirety of North and South Market Streets, but this does still fall in 237 linear feet of granite curb, 630 square yards of bluestone sidewalk, some 57 yards of brick crosswalks, some non-standard DOT crosswalks, handicap ramps, etc.
All right. What's the pleasure of the committee?
Move for
Is there a motion?
approval.
Properly moved and anybody's gonna second the mayor's motion?
Help me out, somebody.
I know, man, these seconds are hard to come by.
I'll second.
Okay, thank you, Councilman Pell. Any discussion on that? Hearing none, all in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Okay, any opposed?
Aye.
Thank you. Number 4, Woodbury Park.
Yes, so this one is
Chairman, Mr. O'Brien is on the call now, I understand.
Okay, thank you. Mr. O'Brien, you want to touch on item E4, Woodbury Park for us? You may be muted.
He's muted.
Mr. Chairman, can you hear me now?
Yes, sir.
I apologize. I was on the phone with a citizen and couldn't get off. So,
Oh, that's okay. That's okay.
Matt, appreciate you picking up those ones for me before that. Woodbury Park, this is a portion of a street and the drainage easements as shown on the plat that we sent with the project, and that's 17 lots. And in this subdivision, the sidewalks and the street trees have been bonded. So everything else has been constructed and accepted, but we will be bonding those 2 items, and the subdivision developer will finish them under a bond.
Okay, thank you, Mr. O'Brien. Again, we have a motion to accept this.
So moved.
Properly
Second.
moved and seconded. Any more discussion on that? Hearing none, all in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Item E5, Mr. O'Brien.
Yes, sir. I'm gonna ask Mr. McQueenie. He's been working on that one. Chip, if you want to take that
Okay.
one for us.
All right, Mr. McQueenie, you're unmuted, Mr. McQueen.
Yes, sir. Yeah, this is a drainage easement. It's actually not part of a development plat. It's a subdivision plat. There are wetlands. It's called I think the development will be called, on one side will be called the Crossing at Verdier. It's formerly part of the Henry Kuznick tract, if you're familiar with that area off East Ferry Road.
Yeah.
It's a good situation for the city. Essentially, the developer got wetlands permits or permits to fill in wetlands on their tract, and it leaves sort of a wetland area right dividing the property into 2, which this subdivision will accomplish, or divide the property into 2. The developer is giving the city a drainage easement, which is really, typically we take a drainage easement for pipes or a ditch or something. This is a drainage easement to maintain it as the natural area. DHEC requires that anyway, and to the extent we wanted, if we ever wanted or tried to use it for any other purpose, and I'm not saying we should, we would have to go to DHEC to do whatever, construction or whatever you wanted to do within that wetland area. But it drains the property, already drains the property to the north. It helps the city ensure that it'll stay in its natural condition. We typically do exclusive stormwater easements. Here, it's not exclusive because it's not exclusive. Essentially means that nobody else can tap into our pipe without our permission. Here, there's already people draining through that area, so it's not, our exclusive right to drain because other people are already draining through. If anybody else wanted to drain into that area, they would have to go through the same process with DHEC. It's very unlikely you could build a pipe into that area or anything like that. But it'll help out in that. My understanding is from Matt, will help out, and Kinsey, it'll help out in that basin.
Okay. We have a motion to accept this easement.
I move. I so
Properly
move.
moved. Properly moved. And
Second.
Second.
probably moved and seconded. Any more discussion on that? Thanks for the explanation, Mr. McQueenie. All in
sir.
favor, please say aye.
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 Any opposed? Thank you. Item E6, dedication
Chairman?
exception to
Yes, sir.
Oakfield.
This is Oakfield Phase 2, and this is the acceptance and dedication of our normal subdivision. Again, the sidewalks and street trees have been bonded. Everything else has been completed by the developer, and we will hold a bond upon completion of those items. We recommend for approval.
All right, what's the pleasure of the committee?
So moved.
Properly moved and seconded by Councilperson
Second.
Appel. All right.
I've got a question, Mr. Chairman.
Yes, sir. Councilman Griffin.
Yes, sir. I'm just wondering, how does this dedication and acceptance, how does it impact this property? As I know, it's been a very hot topic on Johns Island.
On John's Island.
Oh, is this not Oakville on Johns Island? It's a different one.
Oh, you're right. You're right. I'm still on Harmony. Can anybody address that? Mr. McQueenie, can you address that one?
Yes, sir. So this would, it's a subdivision into 4 lots. I would have to ask Kinsey because I don't know if it was previously approved. I think a division into 4 lots would have had to go through TRC to get preliminary plat approval anyway. All this final plat reflects is that they've done what they said they were going to do in the TRC approved documents. And then we would take over maintenance like we would with any road. We would take over maintenance of that cul-de-sac area of Harmony. I think it's Harmony Drive or Harmony Lake Drive. It's
no, Oakville, not Harmony.
Oh, I'm sorry. Rowan Road Extension. I get that one mixed up because there's just one road in both of them with Woodbury Park. But yes, you're right. Rowan Road Extension. It's 4.
My question really is, go ahead. Sorry about that.
No, go ahead with your question.
My question, I guess, in layman's terms is, are we impacting their TRC approval, or are we moving them any closer to TRC approval by approving this, or is this kind of a separate branch, or are they linked together?
Mr. Chairman, I'm sorry to insert, but I think Councilmember Griffin is misremembering. This is not Oakville. This is not Oakville off of Burden Creek. I think that's the one you might be.
Yeah. Let me ask, Councilman Griffin, you're thinking about that track closer to the airport on Johns Island?
Yes.
Yeah, this is.
This is not that.
Oakfield Road, not.
Oh, Oakfield. I thought he said Oakville.
Right,
Sorry about that.
I'd like to adopt a resolution that we can't include oak or forest in any subdivisions in the future because I have that issue all the time.
We would have to get rid of half the subdivisions.
That's the truth.
I agree.
Yeah.
So sorry about that. All these names, I mean, I've seen just in West Ashley, we've got multiple Harmonies as well, on Glen McConnell. So it can get very confusing. So sorry about that.
Yeah, no problem. Well, I'll continue with the question. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Thank you. And thank you, Council Lady Jackson, for listening in. Temporary encroachments and anything that stands out, Mr. O'Brien, that a little bit more exceptional than the norm?
No, sir, we just got some fences and an irrigation, and I'm trying to see if we had a driveway border, but other than that, these are standard. They've been reviewed by our inspectors in the field, and we're recommending for approval of the encroachments. And just to let the committee know, we've had a couple of instances where we've been working with stormwater maintenance. If fences are, a lot of times people are not aware of the easement they put these fences in, and if in any way prohibits or interferes with stormwater maintenance, we will send a letter to them and make them either remove the fence so we can get there. So we're working really well with stormwater on that situation there.
Okay,
These
good.
are all
Thanks.
pretty normal.
Yeah, that's provided for information only. Thank you, Mr. O'Brien. Now down to item H, H1, Barberry Woods. Mr. Fountain, you're going to address that? You're on mute, Mr. Fountain.
Yes, yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. So item H1, this is for the Barberry Woods Drainage Improvement Project. It's the approval to accept. So we previously approved, council previously approved us to apply. This is the approval to actually accept the funding for the National Fish and Wildlife Foundation, the NIFWIF grant for Johns Island Restoration Plan to improve flood resiliency. Basically, this is looking at a plan to figure out where we have existing natural drainage or modified natural drainage systems on Johns Island that are still functioning to be preserved, and where we have systems that have been impacted that are targets for restoration similar to what we're doing in Barbary Woods. This grant provides $117,500 of federal funds and another city match of $117,500 from the drainage fund in the Barbary Woods project.
Okay. By the way, Mr. Fountain, man, thank you and your team for these grants from NIFWIF that's been coming through. I know our department appreciates it very much. Do we have a motion to accept this grant?
So move.
Properly moved and
Second.
seconded. All right. Any discussion? Hearing none. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Thank you. King and Hugie drainage improvement, Mr. Fountain.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This is the amendment with JMT, Johnson, Merriman, and Thompson, in order to move to the next stage of the project on the King Hugie drainage improvement. So the first stage was the design construction documents for the surface level improvements, the drainage collection at the intersection, which will be hopefully moving to construction this fall, which we'll talk about in the project updates. And then we designed 30% complete preliminary engineering design for some different pump station options and kind of picked our optimum pump station approach. This amendment now is to take the 30% pump station and do the basic final design, permitting, construction plans, bid documents. It also includes a little bit of additional funding for the surface construction based on some environmental impacts we found from the gas stations in the area. So this is $582,970.47. It's funded through the Cooper River Bridge TIF. The project as a whole, but not this task, are also funded by the South Carolina Rural Infrastructure Authority grant that we received previously for just under $500,000. And then there's, I think, a few $1,000s of stormwater operations funding just to round out the costs on this one.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Fountain. Thank you for the explanation. Is there a
This will
motion?
make Councilmember Mitchell happy.
Councilmember Mitchell and Councilmember Lewis and Councilmember Saccharin, because that's all either area they represented or transverse. I tell you, that fire station on Hugie Street that the mayor spoke about doing real estate, that's the only fire station that I know of that actually has a John boat to help ferry people when they get flooded at an intersection. So that's standard equipment for that Hugie Street fire station because of this intersection that we're on the cusp of fixing here. So sorely needed. Probably who seconded that motion? I know Councilman Shade made the motion. Who made the second?
I'll second it if it's not been done.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Any more discussion on that? Hearing none, all in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any opposed? Ayes have it. Thank you. Low battery, item 4, low battery seawall phase 1. Mr. Fountain.
Mr. Chairman, do you mind
Whoa, whoa,
taking item 3?
Number
Oh.
3.
The
I thought-
most
No,
the
I
most
thought that
important.
I thought that passed by acclamation. Do we need to discuss that? No, I'm just.
I mean, I know
think
I know
we
it's a
turned that
no-brainer.
down.
I know
That
this is
got
obvious.
denied.
Just checking to make sure Councilman Appel was still with
No,
us.
no, you're
Oh,
right.
man, I'm up. I'm up.
See, he was so still in the picture. I didn't know whether that was a still frame or he was actually alive in that picture. So he definitely came alive when I went past number 3. I'll tell you that. Item 3.
So item 3 is the approval of the original professional services contract agreement with Thomas Nutton Engineering in the amount of $119,600. This is the first work that will be done in the Windermere drainage area under this project for the conceptual design, basically evaluating the existing flooding and looking at improvement options that we've laid out with Thomas Nutton.
All right, good. Is this gonna look at the second outfall or?
Yes, this is looking at basically some options for improvement on the existing outfall, the options to add a second outfall, and then some considerations for capacity improvements along the greenway, some storage improvements in some of the road right-of-ways, and then some conveyance improvements across Folly Road and trying to move some other water outside of the drainage basin. So it's a pretty thorough conceptual look in this area because of how complex it is. It's a smaller area, but a very complex drainage situation. I think we've got a really good approach at Thomas Nutton for this one.
All right, great. Now, do we have a motion out there anywhere?
I would like to move for approval.
All right, properly
Second.
moved and a second on that one. Any discussion or you want to add anything, Councilman Appel?
Thank you, Chairman Waring. I just can't say how excited I am about this project. This is something that's been a long time in the making. The last time this area was studied was 1984. That was the year I was born. I'm 36 now and on city council, and it's been a long time coming, but these are neighborhoods that deal with some very significant flooding issues. Old Windermere, South Windermere, even parts of Old Windermere across 17, even into the Crescent. This is going to be such a great first step in what I hope to be a series of lasting big time improvements for this district. And I'm just so happy that we could have Thomas and Hutton work with us on this. You know, they know this area inside and out, and very excited to get the process started. So thanks for everybody that brought us to this point.
Thanks for your work as well. It's been properly moved and seconded. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Thank you. Now on the item for low battery seawall phase 1.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This one's a little more unusual. We had a memo included in the council package for it, but just briefly, we had vibration monitoring as a service provided as part of our work on the low battery seawall due to the close line historic structures to the location of the work. Basically, the project we have not had any issues with vibration. We've actually had incredibly low vibration numbers. It's been very successful for the approaches that JMT put together for the work and the Gulfstream is putting in construction. But we have had kind of an ongoing amount of very high levels of concern from a lot of the residents and property owners in the area. So we're proposing to extend how much vibration monitoring we're doing through the end of the contract. That would push what was previously a purchase order for just over $20,000 into a scale that takes us into needing a contract for $42,000. So it's not an increase of 42, it's just an increase up to 42, but that does push us into a procurement threshold coming to council for a contract. So it's we basically have a sole source continuing with that same firm. The project funding continues from the hospitality, municipal accommodations, Charleston County accommodations tax fees, as well as CPW covering their portion of the contract.
Okay, what's the pleasure of the committee on this one?
So move.
Properly moved, and I know there's a second out there somewhere.
Second.
Second, Councilman Griffin. Any discussion? Hearing none, all in favor, please say aye.
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 Any opposed? Thank you. Now down to item I, ordinance to create the advisory authority of Church Creek Basin.
Well, Mr. Chairman, the other updates?
Yeah, you're right. Updates.
And I think we did have item 5, Mr. Chairman.
5 and 6. Okay. Charleston, discussion of Charleston County FEMA management flood rate. Oh, maps update. That's a big one. Mr. Fountain.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. So at this point, we have been notified by FEMA that they are ready for finalizing the Charleston County flood maps, and that's
This isn't
Charleston
even
County.
the right building. It's that one.
Wait a minute. Can you mute yourself, Councilman Griffin? Thank you.
So this is Charleston County in the sense of the geographic area rather than the governmental authority. But previously the city of Charleston adopted the updated FEMA flood maps, the flood insurance rate maps for Berkeley County, the sections of the city that are in Berkeley County. This would now be the sections of the city that are within Charleston County. We've obviously been waiting for these maps for quite some time. They finished going through the challenges and the scientific review process. They are ready for adoption. FEMA is going to do it a little bit differently this time, in that rather than the maps becoming effective upon city council adopting them through ordinance, they actually, FEMA has it set where they have like a hard adoption date of January 29th. So no matter when we adopt them kind of prior to that date, they would become effective on the 29th. And what they're trying to do is prevent different municipalities and the county from kind of all having different start dates for the map. So there's kind of one even start date for everything within the county. So we will be bringing these with the ordinance to Public Works Utilities at likely the next Public Works Utilities meeting for a formal first reading, then be able to bring them on to council. There is a question of how we treat building permits and some other options that we just wanted to have a brief discussion with you all on if there are any questions. I mean, our recommendation is to basically use the maps that are currently approved, so that if you're applying for a building permit, you apply based on whatever your currently approved maps are. So we would have the same transition date for building permit applications as the effective date of the maps to avoid any confusion. This has come up because we've had some builders ask, can they apply now for future maps? And we've kind of talked with the county about this and looked at our own way we've done this in the past. And we still think it's the best option to not create kind of a paperwork nightmare for the applicants and for the reviewers, and say that we're all sticking with the same hard adoption date of January 29th. I just wanted to see if council had any input on that. And then separately, we've also been looking at some other potential ordinance changes as these maps, and Mr. Joel goes on as well if there's questions on this one. We're going to get into this in more detail at the next Public Works Utilities meeting. We just wanted to kind of give you a chance to think about this and talk to us if you have questions. The flood maps are basically changing some of the way zones are done in Charleston County in the city of Charleston components. So we're transitioning from kind of what's a traditional velocity zone into a different type of a coastal A zone, basically, which have similar requirements. There is an opportunity for additional flood protection by changing an ordinance to basically retain those velocity zone requirements for properties that will no longer be in velocity zones, will be in this new coastal A zone, basically where there still could be wave action impacting the properties. Those changes are also something that's covered by the community rating system and are eligible for a number of additional points. Of course, our community rating system's visit is in December this year, so it's something we'd need to figure out if we wanted to take action on relatively quickly. We will be bringing you some more documents and presentation information to try to explain this a little more clearly at the next Public Works Utilities meeting, but we just wanted to kind of give you a heads up that that was something we're going to be talking about, as well as see if there were any questions with that permit application adoption date. So just trying to get this on the radar that we've got the flood maps coming, which brings a couple of other items behind it, and we'll be following up with all of you after this meeting, but just see if you had any initial questions or things you want us to cover.
Okay, any questions from committee members? Councilman Shahid?
So I was just kind of curious how this process is going to work. I mean, so the FEMA produces these maps, and then if there's a property owner who disagrees with the classification, how was that addressed?
So the kind of larger overall, the larger overall chance to appeal and kind of make statements, that's passed. There were only a couple of appeals in the county. I think they were down in the Kiowa area, and they've kind of been reviewed by the scientific review panel they have, and they feel comfortable with the maps. There still is the process for, and Mr. Joel can jump in if he needs to, but for letters of map adjustment and modifications based on basically people providing additional information and research for their properties, that continues. And that's the same way it is under the current maps. It'll be under the future maps. This is more just the kind of the county-wide look at them rather than kind of a lot by lot look.
Okay, any other questions, Mr. Fountain? All right, so that's just for information only. Thank you, Mr. Fountain. Any other updates?
So we did have project updates at the last meeting because we only had one meeting last month. It was the first meeting of the month last month and this month. I can give you a very brief update on just a couple of projects that had more significant activity.
That'll be great.
So for the low battery, just we're currently relocating the gas line, and then following that gas line relocation, we actually will start beginning to transition from the southern side of Murray Boulevard over to the northern side of Murray Boulevard. So that'll be a real milestone in the project to basically be finishing restoring and repairing on the southern end and moving on to the northern side. And that project's still on track to be finished this calendar year. So we're doing well with that. We're also in the middle of pre-qualifying contractors for phase 2. So we're getting our documents ready together to bid out phase 2 of the work. For the King and Yuji intersection improvements, and we talked about the recommendation to pass the JMT scope today, but we also are working with CWS on just revising the MOA that we have. Basically, because of the contamination from the gas station, we're just revising the language to how we would kind of share those costs and address some of the potential groundwater issues for dewatering. We think we have a good path worked out with CWS on that. We'll be bringing that back to Public Works Utilities for approval in the next month or so. And we'll be preparing for a fall project bid on that project. And that's the surface improvements, obviously. The Central Park drainage, we're looking to schedule some smaller neighborhood discussions. We've been working on those dates with the county. We think we have a path for moving forward with the county on kind of funding different project areas. The city looks like we'll be receiving, along with DOT, the CTC funding. That's the gas tax that kind of gets pushed back to the counties for allocation to basically fund some of the downstream improvements in Area 4. I think the county is going to take those funds and manage that project in Area 4. So the city will then probably use its funds to focus on areas 1 and 2. As well as the downstream components of Area 3. But that's something we're going to finalize and bring back to Public Works Utilities for consideration. Certainly reach out to a number of impacted council members for that work. Cooper Jackson drainage evaluation. We're actually underway right now on about 10,000 feet of drainage pipe rehabilitation, which will be continuing throughout this month. So I think that's going to show we're already finding a number of areas that'll show some real improvement for short-term drainage in the basin. It certainly won't fix the issues we're seeing out there, but I think it's worth mentioning and getting out there. We've put some flyers out and reached out to the neighborhoods about it as well. Church Creek, the flood storage projects. The selection committee met, recommended the two top firms for interviews, and we'll be interviewing those firms this week, looking to move forward to design work on that section of the NIFWIF grant applications, or the NIFWIF grant awards as well. And then DuPont Wapu. I think we finalized our path forward with the county on that one. We've negotiated out a scope with AECOM for the first 4 project areas to get through design all the way to construction documents on that. And now we're going back and forth with the county and legal, finalizing the IGA and scope so we can bring those to Public Works Utilities for approval this fall as well.
Mr. Fountain, on that one, I've had a couple of people in that doo-wop area that since we had the meeting with the county that you were kind enough to come to, that's willing to give easements. How do we coordinate those people who are willing to give up easements to effectuate drainage improvements?
So that's one good thing we've been working on collaboratively, both in Central Park and in DuPont Wapu with the county, that the county's basically volunteered to have its survey crew do a lot of the plat and survey work to obtain those easements, since these are kind of collaborative project areas.
Okay.
And then basically whichever entity is the jurisdiction over that property could then bring that easement to council for acceptance. So I think it's a really good kind of shorter, cleaner path forward than having to go out and hire consultants and take on that side. So I think they can reach out to either myself or to Mr. Wanamaker at the county, and those are our kind of project people who are helping coordinate that type of work.
Okay. All right, so those surveys you think will begin what kind of time frame?
So they're the county survey crews are basically, as people call up and indicate, they normally put it into a 2-week working schedule. They're pretty quick because they have their own in-house survey crew, so it tends to go a lot faster.
All right, good. Thank you. I'll have them reach out to Mr. Wanamaker. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right, the next item.
So the only item we had left was just the floodplain project updates, which really the major update this time, the most significant update, I should say, was the new Charleston County flood maps. And if we're going to have any questions or discussions on that, we do have continuing progress on the grants, but we did talk about at the last meeting. So there's not anything significant since the last meeting.
Well, let me ask an elementary question. When will that map actually be ready for people to look at and see, is my house in the flood zone or not?
Yeah, so the draft maps are on our website now. They're available on the city website, and the county has a copy on their website. So if you go to the city's GIS page, there's a draft FEMA flood maps. And I will say these maps are a little bit interesting in that they were created with data that basically stopped before the 2015 storms. Because of kind of how long the data takes to build through the maps in a federal system. So most of and whether or not this is because of being short of the 2015 storms, I don't know. We won't know till the next map update. But there are definitely more areas of the city that are decreasing in elevation than anything else. There are very few areas that would be increasing their flood elevations. Most areas are actually showing a decrease in flood elevation. So it's one of these interesting challenges that it's in the short run, it may be good for some residents that they may see cheaper flood insurance. They may see themselves come out of a floodplain, depending where their elevations are. In the long run, they run a risk that if FEMA updates the maps in 10 years and decides that they were actually underestimating floodplain levels, that now they need to actually bring them back up or raise them up over where they were. You may see people who, assume that they were in a good place that within 10 years basically are suddenly in a bad place again, which I think that's why FEMA keeps pushing freeboard. And they've now made it a mandatory requirement for people to move above like a class 9 of their CRS, because I think they're starting to realize how much uncertainty there is and where the future flood maps are going. So I think it really helps us to have passed that 2 foot for new construction, so you don't buy a new house and basically immediately get put into being an issue where you're under the floodplain again in 10 years. I think we're in a good spot as a city and where we've gone with that.
All right, good. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Fountain. Item 7, flood plain project updates. Mr. Joker, you're muted if you can hear me.
Good afternoon. I really don't have any further updates. As Matt mentioned, the big thing that we are paying attention to right now are the maps that will become effective in January. And as Matt said, we'll have a more detailed update for you at most likely the next Public Works and Utilities Committee meeting in a couple weeks.
All right, great. Thank you, Mr. Joker. Now, item I, ordinance to create stormwater drainage basin from Church
Move
Creek.
for approval.
Mr. Councilman Griffin, you were actually muted, and I still heard you make the motion. So,
Move for approval.
all right, good. Properly moved, and there's a second out there. Can we get a second for that motion? All right,
Second.
okay, thank you, Mr. Mayor. Any discussion on that, Councilman Griffin? You have any input on that?
No, sir, I think it's a great idea. We want to improve that area and fix some of the areas that need improvement badly. And if we have input from our citizens and engineers that know that area better, then we can't go wrong. I think that if people are part of the equation as we continue to move along in that district, in that area, it's only going to make it a more smooth process as the relationship continues to grow between the city and our residents. At one point in time, there was a lot of skepticism about what the future of Church Creek held, especially with some of the big flooding events that we've had in the past. But this is just another example of the city doing a good thing, including residents in the dialogue, and I don't see how we could go wrong there. So I appreciate everybody's support on that.
Okay, well, good. Thank you for your hard work and our legal department as well on that. Councilman Appel.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just had a question for Matt about how a advisory authority like this interplays with the AECOM matrix and ranking system that we're working on. I mean, I thought the city's policy was trying to depoliticize these funding decisions and infrastructure decisions by really evaluating projects based on their merit, because I can promise you, you get a bunch of people from my district in a room, or anybody else's district in a room, they're going to, there's a role for the public, but we got to make sure we're making decisions based upon the science and making sure that our towers are used most efficiently. I just had some questions about that because, Church Creek obviously has got its challenges, but the whole city's got its challenges. And I just want to know sort of from Matt what his thoughts are on, sort of the best way to go about making these decisions.
All right. Well, you asked the question, but I saw the mayor's hand go up real fast. So I'm going to recognize the mayor and then I'll come to Matt.
Yeah, I thought I would go ahead and respond to that question, Councilmember Appel, and you had not been elected yet when we passed the TIF district for this Church Creek drainage area. And but for that specific funding source, which is dedicated to the basin and only for the basin. In other words, if we get $1 in that TIF district, we can't spend it for a project downtown on James Island or somewhere else. It's got to be spent in that district. It's the only TIF district, by the way, in the state of South Carolina that's dedicated to drainage and stormwater improvements. So we felt like this was a little different. I hear you loud and clear. I think the expertise that we've mandated to be a part of this authority will be thoughtful enough to be to recommend good priorities to council and to the stormwater department. But again, because they have that specific pot of money that's only for that area, we thought this was appropriate.
Okay,
You want to add to that?
that's a pretty good answer. Mr. Fountain, you want to chime in? You have anything to add?
Sure, Mr. Chairman. So I would kind of, I think, agree with what the mayor was saying, and further that I think it's a good group that can kind of come up with project concepts that can then also be used to basically advance a project to the point where we have the data to enter it into the AECOM prioritization tool, and that will give us an objective ranking in addition to the kind of the recommendations from the authority within the basin, because that, that is, we do look for sources of outside suggestions on projects as well as coming up with our own conceptual project plans. So I think we'll be able to have kind of a twofold look there by having the consistency of the AECOM tool, but also kind of a group that's located within the basin helping come up with project concepts, especially as we get into working with some of the landowners for dedicating property, and things are a little bit harder to score in a conceptual scoring tool without that input from the property owners and without some of the buy-in from the neighboring landowners.
Okay,
Mr.
good.
Chairman, if you don't mind, I'd like to add in one more thing too.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Councilman
Sort of
Griffin.
a real life example of this particular idea. Not only the TIF district and the creation of it did this kind of idea get started, and obviously the mayor was Mr. Mayor was a very big part of it, but also Matt and I have a real life example of what it's like to try to go out and look at one of these projects that we prioritized and see what it looked like when the neighborhood didn't agree with it, or wasn't necessarily involved in understanding the process. We went out to Church Creek, to the church, and started showing examples of the conceptualized engineering for that Hickory Farms Overland Diversion Project. And when we started putting up the visuals and we started talking about it, we were met with resistance right away because of how the water was passing through the neighborhood. And we kind of all took a moment and stopped for a second, and we went back to the drawing board, and we've now gone out and gotten some funding relief to help out in that area create more storage. And there's a chance that those projects can commingle. And for me, it was a real life example of, we need to make sure that our citizens, are aware of what's coming and have an input. And by putting a couple of members of the community, your hardworking citizens that live in the district, they're going to go back and tell their neighbors about what's going on. That gives us that relationship again with the citizen, and I don't see how we could go wrong there. Once we started having these public comment meetings, yeah, sure, there's going to be people that are for projects and against projects, but we're going above and beyond to show Church Creek in that area that we got a couple of citizens that are a part of the committee, and there no longer is that whole concept, especially out there, going to be, well, they're just doing this without talking to us about it. So I look forward to it. And I thought we got some really valuable feedback from that meeting. And it was kind of a, you know, even though it was hard to stop what we had started at that point, you know, for us to take a deeper look into it, who knows, we may be able to tie in this mid-storage grant that we got. We may be able to tie those projects together and make an even better long-lasting improvement there. So that was kind of a real-world example before, you know, we came up with this idea for this committee. You know, we would hate for us to start moving forward on projects and have none of the neighborhoods support them. I can't imagine that that would go over too well.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you on that. I think that's all discussion on that one. We're down to item J, which is something I had added to the agenda, Esau Jenkins plat. This was put on as a result of Sea Island Comprehensive Healthcare Center has a tract of land. I don't know, it may be somewhere between right around 10 acres, and they have only one plat, and they sought to subdivide a 132-bed nursing home from a 8,800 square foot health clinic from a 2,400 square foot off administrative building and an almost 3-acre out parcel. All of it right now is on one tract of land, and for mortgage purposes, they wanted to have them on 4 separate tracts. The surveyor went out, did the surveys in an attempt to get the plat recorded. Our stormwater person, Mr. Kinsey, said, you know, hey, how are you going to explain how this drainage is going to go? I'm just paraphrasing all of this, which popped up. The director reached out to me, Mr. Leon Burton reached out to me to say, hey, what can we do? Because his engineer explained to him it's going to be pretty pricey to go out and survey the existing drainage, put them on a plat, also survey the existing, you know, roadways, parking lots, ingress, egress, etc., to access the property. It's a little bit more simple than just subdividing these buildings, which was a legitimate question. I reached out to Councilman Appel. He said, you know, that question needs to be pushed out to our legal department, which led me to Mr. McQueenie. So we got a little conversation going back and forth before the weekend. And true to his form, instead of Mr. McQueenie waiting until today, a working day, he actually thought about it over the weekend and maybe came up with a possible solution. Mr. McQueenie?
Yes, sir. And I'm not familiar with this particular project, and I can ask Kinsey for a copy of the subdivision plat. And I think
I have all that too, Chip, if you need it. I've got all the details if you need me to pull anything up.
I think the way I originally explained it is stormwater is so hard because sometimes it's diffuse and it's not, you know, you're not channeling it. Sometimes I like to think of it like a sewer system or a road like other utilities, but sometimes it doesn't operate like that. I compared it in this situation to a road where the city won't, when a city reviews a plat subdividing property, if it doesn't have access somewhere from the landlocked property to a public road, it will not approve the plat. And the same goes with the stormwater ordinances. I've not had a chance to look at, I've got volume 2 of my stormwater laws. I don't have my volume 1, which is at home, but there's my recollection in dealing with not this exact issue, but a different issue is you have to show, you know, your downstream ability to drain. I don't think Kinsey's asking for a public easement. I think what he's asking for is some documentation, and they may already have it in their title documents. I don't know. Some documentation that any, what I would call stormwater locked property has the right to drain over whatever other properties are preventing it from getting to the next possible outlet or the city's stormwater system. I mean, it shouldn't, I don't think he's asking for engineering expenses or redesigning the drainage infrastructure. That wouldn't make sense.
No, would it be helpful if I give a quick overview?
Yeah, absolutely.
That'd be
Matt.
I have
That'd be
the
great.
drawings and plats. Okay,
Okay,
so and
Sorry.
no,
Thank
you're
you.
okay. And Mr. Queen, I think I have the ordinance too. It's in the zoning code for easements. It says when required for, it's in section 54-822 sub C. When required for drainage or sewage for the area to be subdivided shall be of such width as necessary to permit proper construction of drainage facilities based on the drainage system of the area. No subdivision shall block or obstruct the natural drainage of an adjoining area. Existing natural drainage shall be maintained or replaced where possible or feasible. This one's actually a little more straightforward than that, I think. Let me just share my screen very quickly. I think this will be easier than everyone thinks it is, Mr. Chairman.
Yeah, well, I think what we think about, I was just hoping it'd be a legal solution, basically some sort of documentation on the plat or the deed.
So this is the Esau Jenkins plat, and basically the existing buildings are here, the parking lot here, and you can actually see there's actually existing drainage pipes that come through and drain these parking lots here and come across to a pond structure. It's over here, and the pond eventually has an outfall. So there's a survey at least of those that looks like the surveyors prepared in the past. I think there are some plans to develop this property, perhaps at the right on Maybank.
That's for the affordable housing piece.
It is. And so the affordable housing piece has kind of a very large existing private drainage easement on it, as well as some existing drainage easements that come through it. What was submitted then for subdivision to the city is this plat. So you can see here are the buildings. And there's basically a subdivision taking this one-story brick building here. It's got a little bit of an L shape. There's a subdivision of an existing one-story brick building here. And then there's a subdivision of kind of this larger tract here, including the parking lot. And then finally this section up front. So our concern is like the section up front doesn't show all of the existing private drainage easements that are shown on it. So we don't know if those are being abandoned or if they're present but not being informed to the affordable housing complex, perhaps, that there are in fact private drainage easements held by these other property owners on that property. Plus, as you recall, there were pipes that run here and through here and actually go across the affordable housing property and come out. So what we were saying is you need to put drainage easements onto those existing pipes, because otherwise the property owners in theory could try to block off those pipes, remove the pipes, and you're getting into an issue. We certainly want anyone developing this tract as affordable housing to know that there's a drainage pipe coming through their property. They do not have to be public easements. All of this is private drainage, so it can all be private easements. They already have the survey, I think, of where those pipes are. It would normally just be putting a 20-foot wide easement centered over the pipes onto the plats. That was all we've proposed at this point. We haven't asked for anything public. No survey work, no new documentation. And if they're planning on abandoning existing private easements like on this parcel, that's great. They just need to show that on the plat and say, here are the easements and they're being abandoned, and get the sign off from the property owners. Because once all these are subdivided, of course, then you fall into the trap of, if someone changes ownership, it becomes very, very complicated later to go back and adjust and adapt it. And we're running into that, as Mr. McQueenie can refer to, on many development projects that are multi-phase development projects fall into this problem, where the first phase gets turned over to an HOA. The developer comes back in phase 7 trying to do something in phase 1 with the drainage easement, and they don't have the paperwork right, and now it's very difficult to get those signatures. So we're just trying to make sure everybody's ducks are in a row for drainage easements and all the property owners are properly protected. And typically it's just the surveyor adding those notes onto the plat at this point.
Okay, great. So just adding notes to the plat. Great. So
I mean, plus the actual boundary work for the pipes, but it looks like they have that present from the other drawing. That may be what they're referring to, is that boundary work. It certainly might, if the surveyor is saying he can't use the previous plat, it might, I hate to put costs onto a surveyor, but it certainly could cost a few $1,000s to do that work if they have a very highly priced surveyor.
Okay. Well, so anyway, that additional explanation about pushing out the notes, that'll be taken care of between Mr. Kinsey and the engineer, or how does that accomplish?
Yep, so it's provided to them as a plat review comment, and we're just waiting to receive the response to that plat review comment.
Councilman Waring, I think that was the struggle I had, is I don't know that we even have we don't draft legal documents for people. So I don't know that we do much more than say we need this documentation. I've tried over the last 6 months or so to get a little bit more involved with Kinsey and Matt on moving things along so that, you know, they're not struggling. You know, what they need to do is I can help lay them out for it. And I haven't been involved in this one yet, but a lot of times it may be as simple as putting a note on the plat as opposed to recording an easement document. And this case, like I said, I don't, other than what Matt explained, I don't know that much about this case, but it may be more complex than that, where you need a declaration of easements and those kind of things. And I would usually review those just from the city standpoint to make sure, you know, they do what the city needs it to say it's going to do as far as private drainage. But I will say on the back end, for me, it saves a ton of time, because I have to, unwinding the knot after this has happened is miserable. And it also, you know, this is a good case as to maybe why not to do it, but we don't really know. I take them at the word, but if they sell it tomorrow, there's nothing I can do about it, you know, or the city can do about it. If they sell one of the tracts that they've subdivided tomorrow, that's just, you have to take people's words for it. And I always say, you know, if zoning ordinances and if ordinances are used correctly, you don't have to take anybody's word for it. They either check the box or they don't. That way you don't treat people differently for any reason. They just either check the box or they don't. So probably an oversimplified way of looking at things, but that's
well,
how.
no, I think you're dead on point. So if a note were placed on it, and in that note, the city ordinance or whatever that applies to it was also on that plat, wouldn't that, I think, prove helpful?
I think in this case where there's only one owner,
Right.
Asking for more than that may not be necessary, because you can't. I had a case before Judge Norton, and he said it takes two to tango. You can't create an easement over your own property. What we're looking at is something on the plat, or something that we can refer to on the plat, showing where the easement is, so that people in the future are on notice, including the city, of where that is. And if they need to change that, they have to come back to us, so that we're always assured there's downstream, quote, there's really no downstream of the city, but there's downstream drainage over those parcels that would otherwise be waterlogged, or whatever you want to call it.
So, Mr. Fountain, after hearing this discussion, does that comply with what you were saying? 'Cause I still had questions.
I think so. I mean, this is what we're looking at is, I think, a relatively standard thing for surveyors. I mean, to basically, you know, dash out easements and say, you know, 10 foot on center of existing pipe is a very simple, inexpensive way to locate an easement for private dedication, and say these are, you know, private drainage easements either shared by the property owners or dedicated to the. I'll leave that up to Mr. Aquini on the exact dedication language, but it's a pretty straightforward thing to apply private drainage easements on this.
So
I would like to see the abandonment of the private drainage easement too, that they're not showing on the on this plat. It's showing language verifying that's been abandoned.
Okay, Councilman Appel.
Thank you, Chairman Waring, and I appreciate you bringing me into this live discussion on a Friday afternoon. This is right before Labor Day, and I'm sure Chip appreciated it as well. I think we both owe him maybe a six pack or something.
I agree. I agree.
But I think that maybe one way to help kind of frame our thinking around this issue is what surveyors and subdivision regulations have been doing for 100 years on access, vehicular access, right? When somebody comes in to subdivide a parcel, the city or the county or whatever jurisdiction's handling the subdivision wants to make sure that that's not a landlocked parcel. So they require access easements to be shown on the plats. And it doesn't have to be public. It could be private, because we want to make sure you know, emergency vehicles can access, et cetera, et cetera. So there's some precedent to this, and we're just, you know, applying this to the storm context, because similarly, we don't want to have isolated parcels with no drainage, because once the unity of title is severed and there's a new neighbor next door, you can't guarantee that they're going to be friendly and let water traverse their property necessarily. So we want to make sure that this is all mapped out, you know, before the subdivision happens to make sure that these neighbors get along well into the future. Because by definition, I mean, an easement, we're very used to talking about easements just in terms of lines on a map and where things are going geographically. But with an easement, you've always got a dominant estate and a servient estate. In other words, one property is benefiting, the other property is being burdened. And that's really, I think, the ultimate importance of having this reflected on the plat, establishing it in the chain of title, so subsequent purchasers can be on notice, lenders can be on notice. The city has the ability to pull a plat if there's ever a dispute and immediately kind of get to the bottom of what's happening, rather than, every time there's, an issue with drainage in the crescent, Chip and I have to go back in our time machine to, the 50s to look at these ancient plats, and nobody knows what's going on.
Yeah.
1850s sometimes. So part of the reason that we have these enhanced subdivision regulations of requiring all this detail on these plats is so that over time, we as a city have land records that start to, be user-friendly to anybody that wants to look at them, and provide a lot more clarity with what's going on. So I don't know if those comments help any, but at least that's how I sort of think about some of these issues.
Okay, I mean, it sounds like we had a plausible solution to this besides, them doing development plans basically all over again. One reason I guess I really got involved with this, Sea Island is the largest owner of affordable housing on Johns Island. And obviously, I know we all allies to that process. And it just seemed to me verbiages would help out more than, again, having to go and get the exacts of all the drainage and ingress and egress through engineering. And at the end of the day, you're dealing with a nonprofit, so they got limited means. So, Mr. Fountain, back to the question that's being posed as we have posed it. Is that going to be the question is the same? Do we enhance the question to the engineer that's trying to fill in the blank here?
We can certainly reach out and provide some clarification, verifying that we're not asking for drainage design or calculations or anything along those lines. We're just trying to make sure that, these existing pipes and easements are shown on the platting. And I think that's a very reasonable request. They should be able to do very inexpensively with just some paperwork markups.
Okay, great. If we would give that additional information, I'd be very appreciative.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right. Any additional information to come before the committee at this time? By the way, thank you, Mr. McQueen. I didn't want you to think about that over your Labor Day weekend, but true to form, that's the way you work. So I appreciate.
If somebody puts a jigsaw puzzle outside my office, I mean, I'm not going to get anything else done for the next 2 days. I'm just, I'm like that. If I could figure out how to turn my brain off, it'd be nice. But
well, I'm gonna tell you,
I love problems and solving problems. So.
Well, thank you again for what you do. And the reason I'm saying this, we undergoing the city's land use plan, and as we look in areas in particular that's unincorporated that may be coming into the city, for example, the Savage Road area, some areas on James Island and Johns Island, a lot of these areas will have family enclaves of 4 and 5 acres, as I explained to you, a house here, a trailer there, never being surveyed off. And when these people do come to get them subdivided for the purposes of family, or even again getting a mortgage or something, somehow we got to have a little bit simpler way of doing it. Now, I know new construction certainly comes with its rules, and I'm not trying to change that at all, but in particular for the existing layout of ingress, egress, making it a little bit more simpler, that's all. So I appreciate all the minds that came to this one real quick, so I appreciate it very much. Anything else to come to the committee? Beyond that, we stand adjourned by acclamation. Thank you. See y'all at Ways and Means.
Thank y'all. See you in a little bit.
Thanks, everybody.